Artificial Sun. Chapter 10. Azura's eyes opened slowly, still heavy from sleep, but they widened when she saw Althea leaning over her. She gasped and tried to move her hands, but they were still bound. Only once Althea stepped away did Azura realize what she'd done. She healed her, albeit awkwardly due to her own bondages. To say Azura was surprised was an understatement. Althea had every incentive not to heal her. She was sure she would have died within the next few days, as the injuries Flynn caused left her weak and struggling to breathe. She had accepted her fate the second the Battlemen tied her up, and she passed out not much later.
To your feet,
Althea softly said, her tone cold.
They're taking us to their leader.
Azura scrambled to stand up, and was relieved when she was void of any pain. Without saying a word, Althea turned and walked forward a bit, once a guard approached.
3,
the guard said. The top half of his face was shielded by the skull of a bull, while the rest of his clothes seemed baggy considering the amount of layers it had. Althea was jealous of how much protection the Battlemen had against the harsh weather while the fledglings were barely surviving the cold.
3?
Flynn raised a brow, and the guard grunted in response.
He wants to speak to 3,
the guard explained. The fledglings shared glances, silently deciding who was going to appear before the leader.
You should go,
Neolani told Bayard with a nod. Bayard's eyes found Althea's, and he took in the sight of her. She looked strained and tired, as if some of the fight had drained out of her, but then she looked at him with determination in her eyes. There was an understanding between the two of them. She was going to go.
Then that settles it.
Flynn said with a slight smirk.
The 3 of us are going.
He left no room for argument as he walked towards the guard so that he was in front of him.
If you would so kindly untie us.
He held his bound hands out. The guard stood at a height of 6'7" and looked down at Flynn with a sneer on his lips. He let out a grunt, and Flynn stepped back.
A man of few words. I can respect that,
he said as he retreated.
Come.
The guard turned and began walking. Althea and Bayard exchanged glances before the 3 of them followed the guard. As they walked, the crowd of curious battlemen began dispersing the closer the fledglings got. They stared at them with curiosity, but also disgust. It was no secret who was responsible for a large portion of the forest burning. Althea looked at every passing face and noticed the scars they sported. They were seasoned warriors, no doubt, which begged the question of why the disembodied voice said they weren't very good in battle. She was sizing them up in case she needed to fight, which she hoped wouldn't be the case because they were sure to lose. They stopped in front of a man who was seated on a makeshift throne made of wood and stone. The battlemen were crafty, that much was certain. This was their home, and they never moved. They clearly didn't need to. It made sense to send a few hundred to search for the fledglings. Based on what she'd seen, the battlemen had many men to spare. The man on the throne, younger than what they had expected, wore a coat made of polar bear skins. His eyes were muddy brown. The top half of his hair was tied back, while the rest flowed down his shoulders and back, and he had a cockiness about him. There wasn't a single battle scar on his face.
3, as requested.
The guard bowed his head at the man on the throne before he stepped aside to melt into the crowd of warriors. Althea eyed them carefully. She knew that one wrong move would cost them their lives. She shifted her eyes to the throne and held the man's gaze. He leaned forward as he studied her carefully. "So," he began to talk. His voice was deep and powerful, the voice of a leader. "You are the ones who burnt the forest on 2 occasions, I've heard." Althea had been so consumed with her gorilla's death and the force field that Bow created that she hadn't realized the damage Azura's flame whips had dealt to the forestry surrounding the area. She sucked in a breath but remained silent, as did Bayard.
That depends on how you look at it, really.
Flynn was the only one who spoke. Althea turned to him and spared him a look that said he shouldn't do anything stupid, though he continued anyway.
The 3 of us individually are innocent of that crime. But the 7 of us as a whole?
He nodded carefully to himself.
I suppose that's true.
The man on the throne was unamused as he opened his mouth to speak, but Althea interjected.
What my friend means to say?
She looked from Flynn to the man on the throne with a false aura of confidence.
Is that while we are responsible for the crimes you've mentioned, we also ask forgiveness for them.
While Althea's words were honest, mild annoyance brewed in her chest at the look on the leader's face. He clearly had little respect for women and barely regarded what she said, so she changed tactics.
You've brought us before you now, and you seem like a clever enough man. So I assume it isn't to talk about what has happened in the past, but rather how you could benefit from us in the future.
A flicker of irritation crossed the man's face, but Althea only cocked a brow upward, as if challenging him. He leaned back in his throne and reached for the hair protruding from his chin. His fingers toyed with his facial hair as he considered the group. "I suppose you know who I am by now," he assumed as he allowed his hand to fall limply on the arm of the throne. He seemed almost bored with the interaction already. Flynn was about to speak, but Bayard intervened because he knew Flynn lacked 2 things he needed to have at that moment: respect and fear.
"No,"
Bayard simply said. The leader looked taken aback for a second, but then a small smirk crept onto his lips. He stood up, tall and muscular. "No?" the man repeated mockingly as he stepped towards the group. Althea noticed 2 axes lodged securely in his belt, though they looked as if they were barely used. "Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Luthor, chieftain of the Battlemen, and greatest warrior alive." Althea remembered what the voice told her in her dream the night before. The Battlemen haven't been good in battle for quite some time. Luthor was toying with them for enjoyment, before he was going to make his decision. Luthor walked past Bayard and Flynn, regarding them carefully, before he made his way to Althea and stopped in front of her. He was so close that Althea could see flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "Your men are good for battle," Luthor said before he held Althea's chin between his thumb and pointer finger. Flynn clenched his jaw, but knew that he was powerless at that moment, and Bayard simply shifted his gaze. Althea, however, didn't allow the fiery determination in her eyes to waver. Luthor continued with a smirk. "You women will be good as slaves." He pulled away and turned to walk back to his throne as if his decision was made.
We women are fighters. You would enslave the stealthiest warriors and sharpest minds simply because of our sex?
Althea asked, threateningly. The Battlemen murmured among themselves about Althea addressing Luthor so confidently. Bayard shifted uncomfortably, while Flynn pursed his lips into a straight line to diffuse his anger. Luthor turned so that his upper body was leaning towards them, but he didn't turn fully. He didn't feel that Althea deserved that respect. "Women can't be stealthy warriors, or sharp minds," He practically sneered before he turned, once again dismissive. Althea stepped forward, though not far, as a few guards stepped closer towards her. Luthor turned and observed her carefully, now putting his full attention on her.
Underestimating us will be your downfall, chieftain.
Althea practically spat the title.
Remember that.
Appalled at Althea's blatant disrespect, Luthor raised a brow and spoke to Bayard and Flynn now. Who is the leader between you two? Flynn narrowed his eyes threateningly, but Bayard turned his head to Althea and said without a beat,
She is.
A lie, of course, but a worthy lie to see the shift in the chieftain's expression. Luthor looked at Althea again. And what is your name?
Althea.
She responded. Well, Althea. He tested the name on his tongue and smirked at her. I would have liked to keep your little group as slaves. I may have even been so generous as to enlist your men into my army. But your blatant disrespect for your superiors has led me to thinking that you all must die. Leader and group alike. I will rip you all out, root and stem. And let it be known that it was a man who silenced your sharp mind. He seemed satisfied with himself as he sat on the throne, and the shouts of the Battlemen rattled through her ears, reminding her of the dream she had the previous night. Flynn and Bayard exchanged glances as their hearts hammered in their chest. If the chieftain didn't change his mind, they were going to die here. Just as guards were advancing on the fledglings, Althea raised her voice. Although her voice was loud, it was also calm.
As I've mentioned before, I think you're a wise man.
While she sounded relaxed, her nerves had overcome her at that point. She was negotiating in sheer desperation. She raised her voice slightly as guards grabbed each of them.
This is the decision of a fool. Do you know the power you hold in your hands? Power that could silence your enemies?
Luthor raised an eyebrow and held up his hand. Althea exhaled a sigh as the guards released them and stepped back. She met Flynn's eyes, and he looked at her with encouragement. He believed in her. If anyone could get them out of this situation, it was her. What power is that? Luthor leaned his elbow on the arm of his throne and rested his chin on the tips of his fingers as he examined her carefully. You are powerless here.
Untie me, and I'll show you.
Althea said in determination. Luthor narrowed his eyes slightly. He was offended. Althea could see it written on his face. Do you take me for a fool? He asked her, his tone hard. Unwavering, Althea repeated.
Untie me, and I'll show you.
Luthor wanted to behead her already and be done with it. But the mention of power that could silence his enemies prevented him from doing so. Knowing that the Battlemen were declining in their battle skills, Luthor nodded at one of the guards. Althea had captured his attention and held his curiosity, a rare feat for a woman. The guard unsheathed a dagger and sliced Althea's ropes in a clean sweep. She flexed her wrists at the relief and gave Bayard and Flynn knowing looks that begged them to trust her.
Hand me your blade.
She held her hand out to the guard, who looked upon the throne. Luthor nodded his approval, and the guard wordlessly handed over his dagger. Althea neared the throne until she was nearly at its foot, and nobody made a move to stop her. It didn't go past her how Luthor's hand had inched towards his axe, and she refrained from smirking. If he truly viewed women as weak, why was he threatened by a young girl nearing him in his territory with only a dagger? She held her palm out so it was facing Luthor. Using her other hand, she dug the blade deeply across the palm of her hand and refrained from wincing at the pain. Luthor's eyes followed the drops of crimson blood that landed at Althea's feet before his eyes found her hand again. He hid his amazement at the fact that her hand was unblemished, as if it had never been cut.
She can heal others as well,
Bayard added in, but Luthor scoffed to hide his intrigue.
We have healers that can do what you have done. Only slower, and by using pastes and herbs.
He sneered as he addressed Althea, his arrogance returning.
Your sorcery has no power here. I still prefer you dead.
Perhaps.
Althea lowered her voice.
But is that really a risk you're willing to take?
Luthor's nostrils flared as he stared at the girl who so openly defied him. He wanted to kill her right then and there, but one of his warriors stepped forward, with a bow over his head.
Chieftain.
The warrior lifted his head and addressed his leader.
Perhaps this manner of healing could be preferred. Many lives have been lost in battle. If we had this girl with us, they might have lived. While we can't go back in time and save the dead, nor can we revive them as we speak, we can protect the lives we have now, lives we might lose in battle without her.
Althea turned her head to smile gratefully at the warrior, but he didn't even spare her a glance. She faced Luthor again and tried to calm her increased breathing and annoyance as he weighed the options in his head.
If we're going to do this, we will do it the Battlemen way,
he concluded as he stood up. The furs in his polar bear coat rustled in the wind as he spoke his parting words.
When dusk arrives, your chosen champion against mine. If you lose, you all die. If I lose, the 7 of you will join us in our battles. Fight when we command it, and heal us when necessary.
He walked away from the throne and towards the tents in the distance. Luthor's ultimatum wouldn't set them free, but it was better than accepting death. It wasn't ideal, but it was a start. Her shoulders slumped forward in relief, and she could vaguely hear the sound of blade cutting through rope before Flynn had gently taken her hand as they were being ushered back to the others. They made eye contact, and through it their eyes spoke. They weren't dead yet. When they reached the others, the guards untied the rest of the fledglings and stalked close by. Bow instantly lunged into Althea's arms, and she released Flynn's hand to grab him. She released a long breath as Flynn and Bayard explained the situation to the others.
So who will be fighting?
Ameera asked with concern in her voice. She hugged her shivering form as she asked this. Everyone exchanged glances before Althea lowered Bow down and stepped forward.
I'll do it,
she volunteered, and continued to explain herself when she caught a glance of Flynn trying to protest.
I'm skilled at combat. I can heal in battle. And the chieftain hates women. Imagine his surprise when one kills his prized champion.
That's not going to happen,
Flynn protested. Previously, he would have agreed that Althea should be the one to fight, but after he saw Azura blanket Althea in flames, he knew he'd never be able to see her get hurt or die. It affected him more than he thought it would. While she could heal in battle, how could she heal herself if she was decapitated or stabbed through the heart with a single slice of a blade?
Flynn's right.
Bayard nodded as he addressed them.
It should be me. I'm the leader.
I'm the one with super strength.
Ambrose furrowed his brows as if he was offended that they were even debating this topic.
It only makes sense for it to be me.
Super strength that could disappear in the middle of battle.
Althea raised her voice slightly. She didn't want anyone to risk their lives. If she hadn't spoken to the chieftain the way she did, he wouldn't have presented them with the ultimatum. It was only fair that she be the one to fight.
I'm the one who made this deal. Don't endanger yourselves because of my decision.
Flynn looked at her before he stepped forward.
I'm fighting,
he stated. His expression seemed carefree and relaxed, but Althea knew him better than that by now. She could see the worry in his eyes, but also the determination. He was stubborn, and he wasn't going to change his mind.
Your lives are too important. That's what'll keep playing in my head when I fight. Because if I die, we all do.
Althea stepped towards him as she looked upon his face. A month ago, Flynn never would have risked himself to save them. He would have easily let someone else volunteer in his place. This time, however, someone he cared for was at risk too. He was fighting because he didn't trust Althea's life in anyone else's hands. Althea wanted to reach out to him, to hold his face in her hands and to kiss him. But she was aware that the other fledglings were watching. So instead of kissing him, she nodded with a small smile on her lips.
Then don't die,
she said. Flynn's eyes met Althea's, and his worries seemed to fade away. For a second, he thought he could get lost in her gaze for all eternity. But then he looked away and towards the others. Instead of asking for confirmation, he stated firmly,
The matter is settled. I'll be your champion.
Time seemed to pass by quicker than usual as the fledglings sat in silence. There was no hiding the worry in their crestfallen faces. Flynn's eyes tried to find Althea, but she was on the far end of the terrain, staring at the sky, watching when the sun would shy behind the horizon. Beau was cozied on her back, while his siblings were roughhousing. Beau always stayed nearest to Althea, especially when she was troubled. Flynn stood up and ignored the curious eyes of the other fledglings as he walked towards her. Bayard in particular watched expressionlessly. Althea hadn't heard Flynn approach until he spoke.
Copper for your thoughts?
He stopped behind her. Althea turned and her breath nearly hitched in her throat as the lowering sun cast a glow on his face, instantly beautifying him.
You wouldn't find them interesting,
she said as she turned to face the horizon once more. Flynn was a good fighter and the greatest swordsman she knew, but she couldn't help the scratching feeling at the pit of her stomach. She didn't know if she could see him in the arena, fighting for his life.
In just an hour or so, you'll be fighting on our behalf.
Flynn swallowed down his nerves and was thankful that Althea's back was facing him. He didn't want her to see him afraid. So instead, he plastered on a smirk that he hoped would hide how he was truly feeling. He walked forward a few paces until he was behind her and looked down at her.
You scared?
He asked with a relaxed expression on his face and his signature smirk. She faced him and sighed softly. She considered pretending, but when she met his eyes, they made her feel safe, as if she could be honest. She nodded softly and turned her head.
I'm trying not to be,
she said with a slight sigh.
Is it bad that I am?
No.
Flynn said, as he too looked fixedly at the sun lowering itself down.
Fear lets us know we're only human.
His smirk fell, and his guard lowered for just a second.
It means we aren't stupid.
We? Althea smiled softly at the realization that Flynn was scared too. It comforted her to know that her fear wasn't misplaced.
I'll never forgive you if you die,
she suddenly said as she turned her head to Flynn. He met her eyes with a smirk.
Dead men don't need forgiveness.
Althea rolled her eyes and watched the sun lower some more. She fought off shivers, but not because of the cold. Flynn continued to look at her, even though she wasn't looking at him. As he watched her, he realized the reason he was afraid. He didn't fear losing his own life. He barely had any regard for it. But he feared leaving her. He feared not seeing her smile again, not hearing her voice or seeing the softness in her eyes when she looked at him. A look she reserved only for him. He didn't fear dying. He feared never seeing her again. The two watched the sun lower until it was creeping behind the horizon. They heard the guards approach, and they knew the time had come for Flynn to fight. Artificial Sun, Chapter 10.